Hello everyone, welcome back. We're going to start 4.5 today, corresponding parts of congruent triangles. We're basically just adding a step to some of our proofs. Okay, so I want to review what we did last week with our proofs. So here we want to prove that these two triangles are congruent given that PE is congruent to PN. So I'm going to go ahead and label that. Whoa, I just know what just happened. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go ahead and label that PE is congruent to PN. After I get my pen. So PE is congruent to PN. The reason for that is it is given. Okay. The other thing I know here that's marked on my triangle is that angle O is congruent to angle R. And that is also given. Okay. So I have to find a third piece, if you recall. And in this third piece, I know that angle P is congruent to itself. Okay, because it belongs to both triangles here. And I'm going to go ahead and mark PE here is congruent to PN. And so angle P is congruent to itself, angle P, and that is that reflexive property. Do you remember that one? Reflexive property equal to itself, okay? So it's hard to see sometimes these triangles. And so if you can kind of see that this PN right here, along with angle P, goes out here to this angle R, we're trying to show that that triangle right there is congruent to this PE that goes up here like this. Okay, so there's two triangles. Sometimes it helps when people draw them like separately and label them out. And that's okay if you'd like to do that, or just use some highlighters or markers also to show that they're congruent like that. So we have our three pieces right now. And if you were to kind of separate them and draw them out, you'd see that this, I'm going to draw them out in the colors here. So we have this triangle here. This would be my P, my E, and my O. We have this angle and my P angle and this O angle here, okay? And then we have this one here, our pink one. We have N and P and R. We have an angle that's congruent here. We have our P here that's congruent, and we have this PN. So you can see here we have our two angles and a side not between them. Two angles, a side not between them. So we have angle, side congruence. So we know our triangles are congruent. So now I just have to state that they are congruent. And so you have to be careful, make sure you go in order. So if I started right here with R that's marked, go to P that's double marked, and then to N. So I'm going to say triangle RPN is congruent to triangle. And if I'd have to start again with whatever corresponds to R, which would be D, or excuse me, O. And then go to P and then E. So O, P, E. Now some of you might put triangle NPR is congruent to EPO, and that's fine as long as the angles correspond to each other, okay? And this would be my angle, side congruence, or I could also write that as side angle, either way is fine, okay? So that was what we did last week, all right? So just as a review, which congruency theorems work to prove congruence? Angle, side definitely works, okay? Side, angle, or otherwise known as angle, side, definitely not. All right. Angle is another one that definitely does not work. The rest of these, side, angle, and my side, angle, side, these are all four that work. Sometimes it's easier to remember which ones don't work than it is to remember which ones work. Okay, so moving on, you need to know, this is our theorem for this chapter is called Cpctc. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are also congruent. This basically says, once I prove two triangles are congruent, that means that every other single part in the triangle are also congruent. Makes sense, right? So once I prove that these triangles down here below, that means all the angles are equal, all the other sides are equal. So because in a proof of a triangle, we only prove that three parts are equal, right? So once we prove those three parts are equal and the triangles are equal, all of the rest of the other three parts in the triangle are equal. So we call this Cpctc. You need to know what that stands for. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are also congruent, okay? And so this is like just basically one additional step we're going to be adding to our proofs. Last week, we basically got to do these first, these state our three pairs of our, our three parts of our triangle that are congruent. Then we would state the triangle is congruent, and that's as far as we went. And this week, we're going to state that the parts are congruent. So notice in this proof, it says to prove that DC is congruent to BC. It doesn't ask you to prove that the triangles are congruent. But in order to prove that a part is congruent, we first must prove the triangles are congruent. Okay? In order to prove the triangles are congruent, we first must prove that 3 parts of the triangles are congruent that fit the angle, side, side, or one of those theorems. Okay? So let's go ahead and prove these this triangle congruent. So we're given the angle BAC, so BAC right here, and notice that it can't just say angle A on this one because angle A defines several angles. So we have to use 3 letters for this one. So we know that angle BAC is congruent to angle DAC. This is a given reason, given to us. We also know that angle AD, whoops, that's a bad D, there we go, is congruent to angle AB, which is also given. Okay, that's kind of a terrible looking D there. I'm going to rewrite that so you can kind of see what that is. AD, there we go. Okay, we need one more piece. Okay, and first let me write this AD right here, congruent to AB. Okay, we need one more piece, and we can see that this AC is congruent to itself, right? So we have AC congruent to itself, AC, and that is that reflexive property. That's going to come up all the time in these proofs. Reflexive property. I'm just going to put that there. Okay. So now we have our 3 parts. 1, 2, 3. We're going to look at these triangles. We have 2 sides, angle between them. 2 sides, angle between them. So I have side, angle, side congruency. So I can prove my two triangles are congruent. So triangle, and I'm going to go from A to D to C. So triangle A, D, C is congruent to triangle ABC. And that is side, angle, side. Okay. So you'll note that I have my 3 pieces. Then I have my triangles congruent. And now I'm going to state that my part, because my triangles are congruent, now I know that DC must be congruent to BC. Right here. So DC must be congruent to BC. Right? I should put that in red. Oh gosh, how come I can't get my color red? There we go. DC is congruent to BC. Right here. Should be 3 hashes. And that's because of Cpctc. Corresponding parts, these correspond, of congruent triangles, which we know are congruent, are also congruent. Okay? And so that's just the added step we did from last week. Okay? Let's try one more. Okay, so this one has a little bit funky because we do have a little bit of a pre-given here. M is a midpoint of AB, and we do have to write that down. So we're just going to write this in black here. So M is a midpoint, oh my gosh, I have to start this all over because I cannot write tonight. All right, so here we go. M is a midpoint of AB. Okay, that's a given. So sometimes you have to start with those before we start with these steps over here. Okay, so because M is a midpoint, we know that these 2 must be cut in half. So AM must be equal to MB. So AM is congruent to MB or BM, whichever. Okay. And this is a definition of a midpoint. Okay. We have the other thing going on because this is a midpoint here. This one must be also equal to that one, right? So we know that CM is also congruent to DM. This is also a definition of a midpoint. Okay, we need one more piece of our triangle now, and I know that angle 2 and angle 1 are congruent because of vertical angles. So angle 2 congruent to angle 1, or angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, doesn't matter. That's my vertical angles theorem. So now we have our 3 parts of our triangle. We want to make sure they fit a triangle congruence theorem. 2 sides and an angle between them, which is congruent to 2 sides and an angle between them. So we have our side angle side congruency. So now I just need to name it. Okay, so I'm going to go from AMD. So triangle AMD is congruent. And if I went from A over here, I'm going to have to start with B. Okay, so B to M to C. Triangle to B, M, MC is congruent. All right. Now that I know that my triangles are congruent, I can go ahead and prove that my corresponding parts, AD, 1, 2, 3, is congruent to the corresponding parts BC. So AD is congruent to BC because of Cpctc. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay? All right, it's time for you to maybe try it. Maybe pause and see how you do and come back and check it out. A good way to kind of get some practice before you start your homework so you can make sure you're on the right track. Okay? Okay, so we're going to start our 3 parts of our triangles first of all. So Cn is congruent to Wn given. I'm going to mark it down here. So Cn congruent to Wn. This one's a little bit tricky, so I hope you kind of tried this out, okay? The next thing we know is angle C, congruent to angle W, given. Angle C is congruent to angle W, right here, okay? So prove that Rn, and so this is where it gets kind of tricky. So we're looking at, we want to know, basically, that Rn, this is what we're trying to prove, is congruent to On. A lot of people aren't sure which triangles they're going to use. Is it the big triangle right here, or is it these little triangles? Since we're trying to show this little side is congruent to this little side, that means that what triangles we're trying to prove is this triangle right here and this triangle right here. Okay, so we have to try to find a part that fits those 2 little triangles right there, right? And so I think the part that we have right here is these 2 vertical angles right here. That would give us angle side angle conjecture. Okay. So what I want to do is I can't just say angle N, so we'll have to say angle WNO. So angle WNO is congruent to angle CNR. Vertical angles. Now we have our 3 pieces. We have angle side angle, so 2 angles side between them. Angle side angle congruency, I have to just name them. So triangle, and I'm going to start with, I don't know, let's go with N. So we'll go NWO is congruent to triangle, and we'll start with N again, so we have to go NCR. Okay, now we know our triangles are congruent. We can prove that our corresponding parts, that Rn, is congruent to On because of Cpctc. Okay. So that is what a proof looks like. You're going to have 4 proofs in Google Classroom. So work through those best you can. Please come to Zoom if you have any questions. Bring them to Zoom, ask the questions, okay? You're going to need to ask the questions. Your quiz this week might be just filling out proofs rather than, quizzes. So we'll have to see how that goes, okay? You guys have a good night, and I'll see you in Zoom. Thank you.